So Jerry, what did you think about this report and how has it impacted the market, in your opinion?
Well, it's definitely had an impact on the markets, to say the least. The USDA's final production reports here on corn and soybeans. Wheat doesn't have a lot of changes in the U.S. because of after the small grains report in the fall. But in this case, we ended up having a 375 million decrease in the corn production number, which really was a major feature of the report for January. And also the other thing it added to it was a 75 million change in the previous ending stocks for last year. So that's a 400 million number, which at this late date is quite unusual. We've had adjustments along the way but at the same time, that size of adjustment is, I can't remember the last time. There's probably been some other one, but it's been significantly quite a few years back. Usually what happens is that you're kind of fine tuning it. The trade was looking for about a bushel down and on the corn, and it turned out to be, I guess 3.8 bushels yield drop in the U.S. On this number. And it's like, wow. We had states like Minnesota and Wisconsin being their numbers dropped by 10 bushels. Now, Wisconsin isn't one of those states that you have observation plots in, but Minnesota does, South Dakota does, North Dakota doesn't. But basically from Nebraska to Ohio, and that including Missouri, you have observation plots along the way, which is usually prevents us from having those kinds of adjustments. But I think the twist of all this is that a year ago we had a lot of concerns about the quality of the crop, the test weights, and that traditionally you're in the worst case scenario, you're even 58 bushels, maybe in some cases we've had high as 60 bushel test weights for the U.S. crop, which is normally is 56. Is any pounds over 56, you get a bonus in your yield. This year, last year I should say, we didn't get that bonus. In my opinion, and I think that's what screwed up some of the stocks numbers from last year. And then now the number for this year, I think the one twist that all of us had a little hard time trying to evaluate here in the people looking at these USDA's numbers ahead of time was the fact that the moisture level that this crop was harvested at on corn was dramatically lower than traditionally during the fall harvest. We don't like to do a lot of harvesting over 20%, but in this case, we like to do 17, 18% type situation. You don't have as much loss, things like that. In this case, because of the type of season we had and the low humidity this fall, I think the real key is that this last fall's moisture content was a lot lower than traditionally the case because of the fact that we had low humidities here during the harvest time, and that helped drive the corn down rather quickly from this traditional 18 to 20% range down towards, I heard some people talking about 11, 12%, things like that. And so if you just take 15% against 11, that's a 25% decline. And now not all bushels had that, but we had quite a few fields that were harvested with lower moisture content than the standard 15.5% for number 2 corn, which is sold around the world. That's really the standard. So in that case, all of a sudden the numbers at the elevator didn't match up with what was going on in the monitors on the combines and also in the bins at home. So I think that was really the subtlety that came through in this whole thing while we had the 172 number this year instead of something closer to the 175 zone. But that scenario also impacted other things going forward, particularly the December crop, December stocks reports for corn.
And what have you seen on the stock side of the issue?
Well, on the stock side of things on corn, the expectations was for a number around 11.9 million, 11.9 billion bushels, I should say, including the beginning stocks, the production, how much was used, things like that. That was the general trade expectation. Well, it came in at 11.3. That was like 600 million less on that number. Now, that really, it doesn't seem that it was similar to last year, this kind of stuff. That shouldn't be a big deal. But the problem is that with that discrepancy, the trade was looking for how much was used in ethanol, how much was used in exports, and then the feed demand is really a residual too. And in that case, that number then pushed up this year's feed demand higher than last year. Now, as we talked about this even last time around, is that the prospect for the the livestock feeder out there was not really looking to stock up on his corn supply last summer, because he didn't have the wet fields and the concern about the yields and things like that. That came as we got into the September, October period, when some of the early yields were maybe not as good as expected. So, yeah, I think they used some stuff, and I think the one thing about the fall feed usage number in the U.S. is it's where a lot of people stock up, or they think that they can get it later at a cheaper value, and we start out with a big number, and then that goes down dramatically, and we kind of it's like the big feed yards in the West. They stock up on corn out there and silage and stuff like that. Same thing in the Southeast. They have certain areas that they supply their corn and then use it externally. Because the other thing is, in the wintertime in the U.S., sometimes your transportation issues can get mixed up because of weather. And so it's better to have some stuff closer to home in your feeding operations. That's the reason why the fall number is always significantly higher than all the rest of them during the year. But in this case, I think the actual yields, the actual weight of the corn, from the standpoint that the moisture in the corn was not there, that also impacted this number. It's kind of, you got to think a little past some of the basic numbers there to come up with that theory. Maybe it's a good one, maybe it isn't. I kind of feel like it makes some sense. Soybean side of the things, I don't have as easy a situation to look at on that side, but there's some important numbers over there.
Yes, and you have major issues in Argentina and Brazil that I think that can contribute to more highs in the coming weeks.
Definitely. I think there's definitely some issues in those two countries, and worldwide weather, and particularly in South America, is being important. Just a quick look at that soybean side of things on the numbers there came in as anticipated to some extent on the crop size, about 35 million down, half a bushel, that type of thing. The one twist we've got going right now in the soybean side of things is that considering we've got one of the biggest export seasons ever, actually it's 81% higher than it was a year ago in the fall quarter, we should have a higher residual number for this fast quarter, similar to what we had like 2 or 3 years ago in the 170 to 200 million number. And the number that came through, officially taking out those two other statistics, turns out to be 70 million. So we still have some interesting data floating around in beans, but the soybean number and the corn number from last week, particularly led by corn this week when it popped out of one above $5, and now it's still looking at things and weather and things of that nature. We're getting closer to the infamous 550 zone that I've talked about in the past, and I can still encouraging producers to go ahead and take advantage of that, those kind of prices to move up another 10%, still keeping some 10 or 15% in their pocket to see what happens for the coming year on the rest of the season. Because as you mentioned, South America's weather at this point is going to be highly important. We've had some rains in parts of Brazil. We've had some rains in Argentina. And to some extent, the Argentine rains, and particularly for soybeans, are kind of timely at this point. The current middle of January period here is kind of the last of the mindset of you want to plant soybeans in your after wheat and that in the stubble. And that is about, it's kind of like in the US, it's like July 15th is the same thing. And that, so that being said, we're right on the cusp of this thing, and there has been some rains in certain areas going to help some of the planting situations, but it looks like in general that Argentina is going to continue to need more rains, and that because they just don't have any real surplus by any means. There's not any extra moisture in the subsoil down there. Brazil, maybe things have slightly improved a little bit in the short term, and that, but the southern areas of Brazil, that being Rio Grande do Sul, maybe even parts of Paraná, and that will also be impacted by the traditional La Nina weather patterns, which that's one of the strongest ones for South America is southern Brazil and Argentina being impacted by La Nina, and guaranteed we still haven't changed our overall weather pattern because of the conditions out there in the Pacific, and the La Nina is still there. Maybe not as strong as it was, but it's still out there. So I guess I have to be cautious about Argentina and parts of Brazil's output being as strong as we'd like to see it, because right now we're starting to tighten things up pretty dramatically here on the worldwide supplies.
And now, do you think that those rallies will generate a shift in corn acres or soybean acres in the United States?
There's been a theory here of how the beans have kind of led this thing up until this last report, that there was going to be an impact of increased soybean acres. Even the government put that out in some of their what they call baseline numbers. They were looking for about 89 million, and they actually were anticipating a smaller corn acreages, maybe by about 1 million or so when they put that out. I'd have to say that with the corn acres will probably stay the same or maybe go up a little bit. And then beans will probably stay 6 and maybe up 7. Depends on what happens on how strong the beans hang in here and how they handle. Now, you say, golly, where are all these acres coming from? Well, 2 years ago, we had a certain level, or excuse me, 3 years ago, I should say, 3 years ago, we had a total number of acres of out there around, I want to say around 319 million acres in the U.S. And then we had the big problems of wet weather 2 years ago. The prevent plantings came in. Last year we bounced back, but we didn't get them all back because of the fact that the ground was still in bad shape in North Dakota, South Dakota, maybe in western parts of the Corn Belt, and even western Kansas, things like that. And so we got maybe half of it back. I think we can get maybe more of that back this coming year, and that's where a lot of that's going to come from. And that, so, but the one thing is that Illinois and Iowa and Indiana, their acres have been maybe just a minor recovery can happen from here on. They jumped back this last year. And so we're not going to, where these extra acres are going to come from is not from our most productive here in the U.S. So that's going to be another factor to look at. I think the one thing that is probably the biggest discussion going on in the U.S. is how in the world can we make a 10 bushel decline in corn acres from August until now? And I guarantee you that discussion is going to run up and down the flagpole many, many times in this country. And maybe it's going to have a difference in what we expect to begin the next year's yields here. I think there's a lot of people frustrated by the fact that USDA has kind of used this standard regression analysis for many years, and maybe they need to adjust that theory going forward on corn yields. We'll have to see. At this point, it's going to be a very interesting 2021.
Any other thoughts, Mr. Jerry?
You bet. It's always good to talk to you, Louis.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.